am here with Greens Party member, or soon-to-be, Katinka Winston-Allom.
Katinka Winston-Allom, yeah.
That's her
I'm
name.
Katinka Winston-Allom, the Greens candidate for Cooper in the upcoming state election.
Yeah, she is. So she's agreed to do with me some interviews, and we're going to ask her some really interesting questions on some of her policies that we've got here. So first of all, cost of living. What's your opinion of the current rental crisis, and do you have some policies in place to help assist with that?
100%. So we know that the rental crisis is biting. It is impacting people across Queensland and across the country. Essentially, I believe that right now renters are being treated as second-class citizens. We have unlimited rent increases that are supported by both Labor and the LNP, which has resulted in, just in this electorate of Cooper alone, in the last 2 years, rents have increased by 31%. Now that means hundreds of dollars every single week that a renter has to try and find in the middle of a growing cost of living crisis where the cost of everything is going up and wages simply are not. So the Greens are talking about a rent freeze and a rent cap. Essentially what this means is that we would freeze rents at the level of the 1st of January 2022 and only allow a 1% increase every year following that. Essentially that provides renters with certainty. Right now, you could end a lease at the end of 12 months and you have no idea how much your landlord can hike the rent. You can also just be turfed out of the home. So another element of our plan for renters is to provide guaranteed lease renewals. That essentially means that you have a right to your home as a renter. You deserve security and you deserve that ongoing certainty where you live. So instead of landlords being able to kick you out at the end of the lease for no reason at all, we're talking about guaranteeing lease renewals unless there has been a serious reason or breach. That includes the landlord themselves or a family member want to move back into the property, serious property damage, or a serious unpaid rent. So essentially it means that renters have that, security in the long term. And the reason why the Greens can fight for this is because we are firmly the party for renters and everyday people. We know that the main drivers of this rental crisis are wealthy property investors that have, some of these property investors have hundreds of homes in their property portfolio.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah, and they see this as, a profit-making exercise rather than a human right. So housing should not be treated as a commodity, it should be treated as a human right.
I couldn't agree more. Definitely, negative gearing. I don't know if I have a question there, but I might even just hit you with it right now. Obviously, or maybe not that obviously, but I believe that negative gearing is partly how housing has become a commodity rather than a right, and why we have all this speculative investment. Do you have any policies or opinions about negative gearing?
Abolish it. Essentially, the Greens have been talking about this for some time. It is a federal level issue. It's not something that the state impacts, but we're talking about winding back negative gearing and capital gains discounts. The biggest line item in Labor's housing budget federally was something like $64 billion for those particular tax handouts, which just means that wealthy property owners can go to an auction with a young family and they have all of these tax cuts in their pocket to be able to outbid.
Keep the wealth in the family. I get it completely.
So we're the only party that supports abolishing and winding back negative gearing and capital gains.
Well, they sound like some very good issues, and I also really enjoy the whole you can't just get kicked out on the spot. I actually spent some time in Jungle Love building a pallet house out of anger because I was very, very, very homeless. I've been a builder for most of my life, and I will never be able to build a home. I can build a home for other people, but I can never build a home for me. Really, really, really good policy. Thank you very much. Another one I'd actually like to bring up is land banking. So can you tell me about land banking, and if you've got anything to attack and tackle that, what I would consider an issue?
Land banking is a massive issue. So right now we have a housing crisis And one of the reasons for that is that private property developers practice land banking. Right now in Queensland, there are 99,000 sites that property developers own with all council approvals ready to build. And across Queensland, there are also 500,000 sites owned by property developers that are in the process of getting those approvals. Now, instead of building on those sites, what property developers do is when house prices start to stabilise or drop, property developers artificially restrict supply to drive up demand and drive up those house prices. There is currently nothing stopping them from doing this. So the Greens' proposal is to create a public property developer that would actively compete with the private property industry and get the government back into the job of building housing, not just for the 43,000 Queenslanders that are currently on the social housing wait list, but also for nurses, teachers, baristas, young people, pensioners, people who want to set up a life for themselves. The public property developer would build beautifully designed, sustainable homes at about $225,000 below the average market rate. So it would bring in genuine competition into the market, and it would mean that private property developers couldn't keep getting away with charging over $1 million for a shoebox.
So do we have any ideas to do anything with the land that's already been bought? Or are we just going to hope that we can compete with them, with the public builders, to bring the prices down?
Yeah, so we're talking about acquiring land that is being land banked by the public property developer in order to build affordable housing on it.
Right, gotcha. All right, and look, this sounds so good for the renters. I am curious, do you have anything for the owners out there? Because obviously they don't really want their income freezed, or what they consider to be income. Do you have any policies or kickbacks or ideas to compensate them for what they will consider to be a loss?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to say is that our housing policies should be taken as a whole, and really our whole platform should be taken together. So while we understand that some people might not like the idea of a rent freeze or a rent cap, the fact of the matter is renters have been struggling with these increases for far too long, and there is balance in this. That's okay. So what we're talking about is establishing a public bank. We used to have one of those, the Commonwealth Bank, and that would provide mortgages that don't have the hundreds of dollars in profit per month that an average mortgage holder pays to a bank. So banks are, again, established for profit. They are one of the most profitable industries in the country. They're also driving the housing crisis. We're talking about a public bank like the Commonwealth Bank that would provide far cheaper mortgages for homeowners, and it would ensure that everyone has a more sustainable mortgage option.
I think a public bank is a very, very good idea. So you're telling me that the Commonwealth once was and they've sold out now?
Yeah, so the Commonwealth Bank was sold for $8 billion at the time. I think it was a public bank before. It was sold off because government loves outsourcing its responsibilities to the private market. And
Johnny Howard.
Well, it's been done by, sadly, both stripes. And that's essentially meant that now the Commonwealth Bank is posting record profits. And it just shouldn't be this way. People should be able to have loans at a reasonable rate, not for profit, but just for a human right.
Yeah, I completely agree. And now, speaking of record profits, if you guys have got a handy dandy booklet, this has got a lot of really good information in it. You should definitely have a read of this, because also in your handy dandy booklet, you talk about breaking up the duopoly that is the price gouging, Coles and Woolies cost of living that we've been having to deal with. I am very, very, very curious on how you plan to do that.
Yeah, Coles and Woolies are making a mozza. I mean, their CEOs currently make about $8 million a year.
Record profits.
Everybody knows they're price gouging.
Yep.
The Greens actually established the parliamentary inquiry federally to investigate the price gouging of Coles and Woolworths.
Really?
Yeah. And they also donate to Labor and the LNP. About $6.7 million has gone to Labor and the LNP from Coles and Woolworths, which is why, even though we've had this inquiry, even though everybody knows, no real action has been taken to rein them in. So the Greens are talking about capping 30 essential grocery items. France actually caps 5,000. So we think this is a really reasonable start. Things like bread, milk, cheese, nappies, toilet paper, anything that is essential in the home. Capping it at the January 1st rate of, I think, 2022 again. And that basically ensures that people can have access to those goods without them, increasing in price year on year or month on month. I mean, my understanding is that bread, milk and cheese have gone up about 25% in cost in the last year or so, and it's just ridiculous. It's pure profit making for the Coles and Woolworths giants, and it's meaning that people are struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah, you're entirely right. It is 100% price gouging. And in fact, this is actually how I was able to meet this lovely lady, because I was taking myself to Aldi. I know the profits don't stay in Australia, but it actually isn't a part of the duopoly. One of the few things out there. So yeah, support Aldi, I guess, as well, guys. Alrighty. So, obviously the Greens are all about environmental. That is your colour.
Yes.
So under the LNP we had third world land clearing levels. And since then, Labor's come in, they've brought in new policies and policies to protect the reef. Do you guys have some environmental policies that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think one thing to say is that Queensland and Australia as a continent, it has some of the most extraordinary biodiversity in the world, but we are also an international hotspot for biodiversity loss. Australia is the leading in mammal extinctions, and it is pretty heartbreaking that
really is.
Yeah, we don't really have enough commitment towards ensuring that our beautiful natural environment is protected. So obviously there is a myriad of issues around environmental protection. We want to ensure that there's a circular economy to deal with waste. We want to ensure that there's no new coal and gas exploration to deal with climate change and emissions. And we want far more funding for Indigenous ranges and for protected areas. We basically want to see the environment prioritised in the eyes of government. And we always will be a party for the environment.
And I think that's a really, really good agenda to be standing behind. So going on to coal mining. So a lot of what Labor's policies have been brought in have come from taking money from the coal mines and paying for it. If you guys get in, I've actually read your policies. They're even far more grandiose.
Spicier.
Yeah, they're very spicier. And they are some pretty amazing ones, but very expensive. So if Labor's paying for it with mining tax, what's your plan to pay for it, and what's your opinion of mining tax?
So the Greens actually proposed making mining corporations pay their fair share and have been doing so for a long time. And they bloody well should. And it's also because the Greens aren't on the take from fossil fuel corporations. They're one of the single biggest donor groups to Labor and the LNP. And we think that's why they get away with highway robbery, essentially, of our resources. So the Greens are talking about reining back the power that fossil fuel corporations have on our democracy. We want to raise the base rate of their royalties in Queensland to 35%. Right now, we have gas companies paying 4% in royalties in Queensland.
4%. 4% for our natural resources.
Yeah.
Isn't that a bloody shame?
Yep, and coal 9%. That's less than what Texas makes their mining corporations pay in royalties. The top 10 exporters in Queensland paid $0 in federal tax as well. And unfortunately, they've exported $634 billion worth of our resources in the last 10 years, and they've paid a pittance on that. So
All offshore.
All offshore. So Labor has introduced a very short-term sugar hit of coal royalties, but that was dependent on the price of coal increasing for a short time, and that's already dropped. So all of these little election sweeteners that you've seen from Labor, like the $1,000 off your energy bill per household, that was because of this short-term mining royalties hit. Unfortunately, though, that's already stopped. So the Greens are talking about structural improvements to raise royalties of mining corporations. We want to raise them to a base rate of 35% over the next 4 years, which would provide $61 billion, even while we phase out existing fossil fuels and fund our entire platform. We're actually the only party that fully cost our entire platform, and we're really proud of that.
That does sound like something to be very proud of. All right, well, lastly, I'd just like to show you this article that I found here. And as you can see here, 1% of Australian taxpayers own nearly a quarter of all of the property. And so 7% here of property investors, or roughly 200,000 people, accounting for 25% of all property, own 6 or more houses. So I have my own crazy out there proposal that I think that it would be only fair if everybody only had 5. Just 5. I'm not talking places or businesses, I'm just talking dwellings. And if you could implement that immediately, that would be 215,000 minimum, because we're just talking about the people with 6. If you did it for 4, that would be over 400,000 houses. Once again, we're just talking bare minimum. There's people out there with hundreds of them.
Yeah, literally.
So you're probably looking closer to 500,000 immediately hitting the market. It would, of course, crash the market, but people who are of our generation would actually have a chance at buying something. So I'm curious, what do you think about that as a policy being introduced? Because I told this to Labor as well. Anybody that'd be willing to do that, I'd follow them to the ends of the earth.
Compulsory acquisition of people's private property is not currently on the Greens' radar. However, we are talking about
Too spicy.
We are talking about acquiring land that private property developers and Coles and Woolworths currently own if they don't build on it within a certain time frame. Because ultimately, the private market is out of control and we need to provide an alternative. We're talking about public ownership and we're talking about beautiful homes that are created by the government. 1 in 7 homes used to be created and built by the government after World War II, and that resulted in the single greatest increase in home ownership in our history. So we believe we can do that again, and all it needs is political will, which we have because we're not on the take.
That is definitely a good way to prove that you're not corrupt. Alrighty, I have just one last one. So this one came through in my mail, and it says that your Green representative from my area worked for coal mines. So I know you guys aren't on the take, but do you know anything about this?
Yeah, this is a fascinating grasp at straws.
Okay.
From someone. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
actually
he pointed that out. There's
authorised.
nothing actually written there.
Yeah, so ultimately Holstein worked as an engineer.
Right.
And yes, she did work for a mining corporation as an engineer.
As you do, most of the time, yep.
She's very open about the fact that her experience working inside the fossil fuel industry radicalized her. She wanted to make change for renewable energy working in that space and soon realized just how close the fossil fuel sector and Labor and the LNP are. She says that she remembers seeing one representative employed full-time to lobby to the LNP and one representative full-time employed to lobby to Labor, and at the end of the day, they were kind of going to get what they wanted. So we believe that we need to break the stranglehold that the fossil fuel industry has on our democracy. We need to break the stranglehold that it has on our natural environment and resources. We need to invest in a public mining company. We need to transition to 100% renewable energy that's publicly owned, manufactured and recycled onshore. And we need to tax them properly.
I completely wholeheartedly agree. So this little bit of propaganda, so she was part of the coal scene, but she's not a part of it anymore. And in fact, the fact that she was a part of it is why she's standing up for it. And that, I can definitely get behind that. I'm really glad I brought that up.
Yeah, she's sucking it to him.
Yeah, good on you. All right, well, thank you so very much for your time. Oi, me too.
Thank you for your time. And vote 1 Greens.